Can planting trees help us reach our climate targets?
How do we harness the power of the immune system? What new information does the Atlantic Ocean hold?
We'll be exploring all this and more on this season's 10 Things to Know About. This week, we're unearthing the fascinating world of fungi. Fungi are an ancient form of life, existing long before dinosaurs roamed the planet and before many of the first plants. They thrive in a wide range of environments and can grow in weird and often wonderfully colourful ways. The form of fungi that we're all most familiar with is the humble mushroom. They are big business in Ireland. We grow and export millions and millions of them. But how we are going to grow them in the future is going to change. Helen Grogan has been working in the mushroom sector for the last 30 years.
Well, the mushroom industry in Ireland is a pretty significant industry in horticulture. We grow 67,000 tonnes of mushrooms a year, and that has a farm gate value of around about €135 million. If we break that mushroom production down into daily production, it represents about 6 million mushrooms being picked every day.
Wow.
Now, that's a lot of mushrooms.
We're not eating all those mushrooms.
We're not eating all of those mushrooms. So 80% of those mushrooms are exported into Britain.
And I think, like, as people move to vegetarianism or eating a little bit less meat, people are eating more mushrooms, aren't they?
They are indeed, yes. Mushrooms are one of the foods that contain all of the amino acids from a protein perspective. And they also contain things like vitamin D, vitamin B, so a lot of minerals and vitamins that will be good for vegetarian diets.
The white button mushroom is the most commonly grown mushroom in Ireland, and the industry heavily relies on peat to help provide the ideal growing conditions. However, because peatlands are hugely important natural carbon sinks and areas of biodiversity, mushroom researchers need to look to a future beyond peat.
We use peat in growing mushrooms. We put it on as a thin layer onto the top of the mushroom substrate. And it has particular properties that mean that it has very little nutrition, it holds a lot of water, and it's very clean. And these combination of factors often stimulate the mushrooms to reproduce. Because it holds so much water and holds it really well, we actually get really good quality mushrooms.
We import our peat now to do this, do we?
Yes, we do. We used to extract our own peat, but we don't do that anymore, and so we will be importing peat now for our mushroom casing. We're all aware of how important peatlands are for our global ecosystem. They're great reserves of carbon, and so the mushroom industry, because we use peat, we do have to look at trying to address that. As I say, peat is almost the perfect substrate for the top layer of the mushroom crop, and finding something with the exact same properties is proving a challenge.
Michael Gaffney works in the Horticultural Development Department in Teagasc.
Peat is a fantastic material to grow plants in, and the development of peat as a growth media really has led to the containerization of crops. It really has meant that we can grow more crops in containers, which means that we can now grow crops indoors more. It has solved a lot of issues in terms of how we can optimize the irrigation into crops, how we can optimize fertilizer use. It's really helped us solve a lot of issues around persistent soil-borne diseases. But I think it's widely acknowledged now that we do need to move away from it and move into other substrates.
Yeah, it was good while it lasted, did a great job. It's time to move on and do the science of how to do it.
Absolutely. Also, increasingly what we're going to find in the future, and Wageningen University have recently published a study, is that from 2017 to 2050, they predict that the demand internationally for growth media is going to increase fourfold. So we're going to go from needing about 63 million metre cubed worldwide of growth media up to over 280 million metre cubed.
What?
So therefore, what we're trying to do on the Beyond Peat project is identify materials on the island of Ireland that we can source locally that can be transformed to try and support a more sustainable horticultural sector. Production of mushrooms, in the production of soft fruit, the production of hardy nursery stock, in the production of ornamental plants, and in the production of young plants for field vegetable production.
As peat has unique characteristics that play a crucial role in the growing of mushrooms, finding a single material to replace it is unlikely. Owen Corbett is looking to identify new materials and how to combine them to achieve properties similar to peat.
Getting the perfect blend is the challenge. Firstly, it depends on what crop you're growing. So mushrooms, for instance, are a very different crop to, say, strawberries like we have behind us. So this is peat. It's really good at holding on to moisture, and it's always a consistent material. This is coconut coir. It's nice, light material, and that benefits it when it goes into some of the crops that are grown up on high. This is a composted material. It's incredibly nutrient rich, which is a benefit in some ways and a drawback in others because it can't be used in high proportions. This is a composted bark. It's one of the many ways you can use bark, and this is a byproduct of Irish sawmilling. So this is a really available material, and this is wood fibre and gives great volume and adds
A lightness to it. I can tell by just looking
exactly.
at it.
It's nice and fluffy and full of air. Depending on the inherent qualities of the components within a blend, that will dictate how much of it you can add to a particular mix.
But it's unfortunately, and if you're a test chef, you go, I'm going to have a scoop of that, scoop of that, scoop of that, stick it into the oven, bing, an hour later, oh, that cake isn't very nice. Whereas you have to wait much longer to see the results of your work.
Exactly, yeah. We'll test the blends and see how they actually compare against peat as used as a control and see how they perform then over the duration of a crop. And not only do we do it once, but we have to repeat the experiment in case there was any biases or in case, in fact, we learned anything on how to manage the crop or how to treat new media as well.
Are there other waste products in other bioindustries that might be useful too?
Yeah, part of the work we're doing is looking at the novel materials and novel processes as well to make best use of the resources that we have in Ireland, especially those from the biocircular economy, so byproducts and wastes of Irish industry and land management practices.
Right, I think it's about time to check out some mushrooms. Hello, mushrooms. Fungi grow from spores, tiny seed-like structures that grow into an intricate underground network of fungal threads called mycelium.
And up here you can just see the white mycelium of the mushroom growing through that, and now it's growing up into this black casing layer, which is nutritionally poor. And as the mycelium grows up, it says, oh, there's no more food, I better start producing mushrooms. And so in combination with dropping the temperature and the relative humidity in the growing room and the fact that there's no nutrition there, all of a sudden the mushroom switches from vegetative phase into reproductive phase and we get mushrooms being produced.
As part of the project, Helen and the team are looking at 10 different peat alternative blends and comparing them with their control treatment, marked as treatment 1. Now, to my untrained eye, I know nothing about growing mushrooms. They don't look very healthy to me.
No, this is a peat alternative with a plant fibre incorporated at 75% level, and we can see that that mix is actually supporting mould growth on the surface, which doesn't look very good, and it'll also damage some of those mushrooms. You can see a little bit of spotting in there.
Yeah, and like they're barely growing in comparison to the control, which are ready to be eaten.
These 3 here now are with bark treatment. 25, 50 and 75%.
Okay.
And we can see that we can definitely see more delay with the 75%. So these mushrooms are more deeper embedded into the casing, and we risk them growing up and becoming a little bit damaged by the casing material or dirty with the casing.
And but you consider this dirt, do you? Like a little bit of dirt on it? I mean,
we wouldn't really like to see too much of the casing adhering to the surface of the mushroom. We like the mushrooms to produce on the surface so that they stay nice and white.
right, God, consumers are so fussy, aren't they? I just want the white, perfect mushrooms, thank you very much. It's great to see it, like when you're saying you're not getting the same productivity, but it's so obvious.
Yes,
yeah.
you can see definitely that some materials are very much behind.
Yeah.
Now, that may be acceptable if we can learn to live with that or plan the crop so that we're not expecting mushrooms today, we're expecting them 2 or 3 days later, then that might work.
Yeah.
So it will be a growing learning experience for the industry.
Yeah.
To handle this new material.
When you find these different alternative growth media, because I have full faith in you, will growers get on board? Will they be able to make the changes?
the dedication that it takes to produce a professional crop really cannot be underestimated. Be it tomatoes, strawberries, mushrooms, nursery stock such as this. Like, you know, the people who do this are incredibly skilled, they're incredibly dedicated to it. I think growers transitioning into other materials isn't really going to be the issue. The issue really is going to be about knowing what we're going to have to change in the production process, and also knowing that we will have sufficient amounts of these other materials available to growers to allow them to transition into them.
It's 2003, and deep in the forests of Oregon's Blue Mountains, a group of scientists are on the hunt for the largest living thing on the planet. But they're not searching for a whale, for the world's true behemoth lurks beneath. Silently and in the darkness, the largest organism on Earth extends its reach. They've discovered Armillaria ostoyae, now known as the humongous fungus, a giant straight out of a horror movie. Measuring in at over 2,000 acres in size, that's roughly the same area as Athlone. A combination of good genes and a stable environment has allowed it to creep ever bigger over thousands of years. Hidden in the soil, the fungus makes its living out of death. A parasite that preys on weak trees, it sucks its sylvan victims dry of nutrients. Slowly the rot sets in as the fungus unleashes its wrath. Long black threads of fungal tissue move through the soil, seeking out tree roots to infest. Its felty white filaments filling any room as its enzymes transform tree tissues into mush. The slow death marches on year by year, taking anything from 20 to 50 years for a tree to be killed. Even then, the fungus dines out on the deadwood until nothing remains. Capable of living for thousands of years, these millennia-old mycelia will surely outlive the last of us. See you next time.
How we classify fungi is a hotly debated topic, with the estimated number of species ranging from the hundreds of thousands to the millions. But most fungal species are microscopic, growing in branching type structures called mycelium. And despite several mass extinction events through the ages, they have always survived. As we saw in part 1, fungi can thrive in peaty soils, and with peatlands covering approximately 1/6 of our island, that's a lot of food for fungi. Organic material, like fungi, can be preserved for centuries because of the level of acid in a bog like this. If you know what you're looking for, these fungi could be central to unearthing the secrets of our past. Abbeyleix Bog in County Laois is one of the many raised bogs in Ireland, where vegetation builds up over time. And though it may not look like it, there are thousands of fungal species growing in this special environment, as researcher Chris Mays explains.
So an individual fungus can be pretty large. They can cover huge surface areas with their little mycelia and hyphae. They can spread huge regions of a bogland like this. But most of that's actually happening underground, and so you won't see those sort of large-scale structures unless you start digging. So you can see a few of the mushrooms poking their heads out here, and these are the reproductive structures of the fungi living underneath the soils. So even though we only see a few mushrooms poking their heads out, these actually represent a much larger biomass underneath the subsurface here. And so that's actually a good sign of a healthy environment. In an environment like this, fungi and plants are playing a pretty important role for each other. They actually have what they call a mutualistic relationship. They're helping each other get by. And so the plants will be producing lots of sugar for the fungi, and they'll often be decomposed by when they die by the fungi. On the other side, the fungi are actually producing lots of water and nutrients for the plants. And in this case, what they're serving in a bog is actually helping to produce lots of biomass, and that biomass is actually being buried underground. And so it's a really good way for carbon to be preserved. If you keep these areas nice and wet, essentially what you have is a nice productive relationship between those fungi and the plants. If that's the case, you end up with this building up of biomass. But as soon as those peats start to dry out, you end up emitting a lot of carbon from those peats. So that's a big problem. Fungi are really resilient. They tend to resist all sorts of disasters that go on, from big rocks from space during the dinosaur extinction, big volcanic eruptions. So by looking at them specifically, you can see how the ecosystem has changed because of their long duration in Earth's history, but also because they tend to be the things that withstand those disasters. In the wake of a mass extinction, for example, you'll often find that the fungi are taking over the scene. They have a little fungal party in these events, and you end up having a proliferation of fungi destroying and breaking down all the dead biomass in the area. And so they're actually a really good marker for some sort of chaos in the environment.
As vital reservoirs for carbon and biodiversity, the preservation and restoration of our peatlands are essential for meeting our climate goals, and the fungal species that flourish here make these remarkable areas a fascinating natural laboratory to study climatic events in our history. At this 4,000-year-old bog in County Wicklow, Rebecca Rivera is going in search of ancient fungi. What can fungi tell us about a place like this?
So fungi are really good indicators of local conditions and what was happening in this very localised area at this time. What we're doing is trying to find what was happening in the bogs of the past, to infer what's happening in the bogs of the present and also the bogs of the future. So being able to predict perhaps how the bogs will recover with our restoration efforts and conservation efforts.
Fungi are a feature of healthy peatlands, and as part of her research, Rebecca collects core samples from different bogs around the country.
So this is a metre core, and this represents the last 1,000 years of history in this bog. So if we take the first 10 centimetres, that's worth about 100 years of the past history. And if we go down to the bottom of the core, this marks about 1,000 years in the past.
The core samples that Rebecca collects on her field trips are taken back to the lab to be studied under the microscope.
At first, it'll look like a bunch of debris under the microscope and you won't know what you're looking at. But the more you're looking at it and finding patterns and you start seeing the same things, you can start identifying pollen, spores, you might see some invertebrate remains. Fungi can tell us a lot about a place like this. It can tell us about the fire regimes in the habitat, plant dynamics, animal dynamics, carbon in the area.
You said fire. We can learn where fires happened from a mushroom?
Yeah, certain types of species of mushrooms will grow on charcoal, microcharcoal.
Right.
So we can look to see if this fungi was growing at this stage and we can kind of infer if a fire was happening.
Fungi feed off organic matter, and some species like to grow on animal dung. So ancient fungi found at different depths in the core can paint a picture of the world they inhabited.
It can tell us about not only megaherbivore dynamics, but also the vegetation dynamics and the interaction between the megaherbivore and the vegetation at that time.
When you say megaherbivore, what do you mean?
A large grass-feeding animal.
Like an auroch or something?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So ancient cows.
Yeah, yeah.
So what about evolution, or at least environmental adaptation? Is a fungal spore from 1,000 years ago going to be the same as a fungal spore from today?
So luckily fungi haven't evolved too much compared to what they were 1,000 years ago to today, which is quite helpful in our research as it gives us a good comparison and baseline. So far I've taken some samples from here, and I've also taken some samples from a raised bog in Offaly. So the hope is to be able to compare and contrast these bogs, and are the fungal spore communities different across different bog types? Are they varying across different parts of the country, or are they the same?
Fungi are fascinating. They feed us, they're important to soil biodiversity, they can help us understand global challenges like climate change, and some can even help prevent diseases. And aside from providing the inspiration for Hollywood's next horror franchise, we can still learn so much from them.
There's about 5,500 or so species that we know of fungi in this country. But if you think about the number of species that probably exist here, there's probably more like 9,000 or 10,000. And so that's, that gap in our knowledge is one of the main reasons why it's really important to study these. There's probably a whole range of different functions they serve and various benefits that we as humans could actually have from these if we just knew a little bit more about them.
That's our 10 things to know about fungi. Next time, we're exploring Ireland's deep water worlds.